the science.
The fight is that the blood of 1,000 men and women was spilled within these walls. Limbs twisted and broken, eyes gouged from bloody sockets, flesh burned black.
Please. You await the dead. In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Roswell, UFOs, flying saucers, alien abduction. Are we alone? Information regarding this and many other questions about the unknown are only a click away at www.theufostore.com. TheUFOstore.com offers hundreds of DVDs about UFOs, aliens, crop circles, conspiracies, Bigfoot, suppressed science, ancient mysteries, and the latest DVD releases like Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs and the Alien Files 5 DVD set. TheUFOstore.com also offers the book Roswell, It Really Happened by Jesse Marcel, one of the last survivors of the Roswell UFO crash that examined the spacecraft wreckage in 1947, revealing its hidden secrets. Log on to www.theufostore.com and request a free UFO Store catalog. To receive a free catalog by mail, call 541-523-2630. That's 541-523-2630. TheUFOstore.com, the largest selection of UFO products on the internet.
And hi, welcome to World of the Unexplained. This is Jay Scott.
This is Trent Lackey. I thought you were going to do that other thing.
The other thing?
Yeah, you do that at the end.
What other? Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll do that at the end.
Yeah.
We've got a new catchphrase now, though.
Oh, really?
Big on God, big on guns. That's
well,
right.
You know, last week
I know. I said it last
big on
week.
Gods, big on
yeah,
gods.
well, my tongue slipped. But no, we've got the new catchphrase now, and that's good. And it's getting produced as we speak, so it's going to be
really?
it's going to be hilarious. I talked to Jeff earlier today that the stuff we're using for it, it's going to be really funny. I don't want to give much of it away because it talks about other paranormal talk shows and it kind of makes fun of them. You know how we like to bully everybody, yeah.
So it's really bullies. You know, where's my
it's really
laptop?
great. It's not here. Anyway, tonight, guys, we've got Thomas Horn returning, and we're going to try to pick up with where we left off. If you didn't hear the first interview, go and download it. And you can get that at wotu.libsyn.com, or you can go to our website, worldoftheunexplained.com, and click on the archives link, and that'll take you to where you need to go. It's a very interesting story. Tom Horn is a researcher. He's a freelance writer. Excuse me. Gosh, I'm having a horrible time talking today. He's helped with a lot of films. He's written a lot of books. His latest book is The Ahriman Gate, which we discussed briefly last time.
Yeah.
He runs a website called Raiders News Update, and that's raidersnewsupdate.com. And he's also helped with the movie Deceived, starring Lou Gossett Jr. and Judd Nelson. And, there's just a lot of stuff. He's been on a lot of shows, a lot of TV shows, a lot of radio shows. So let's just bring him in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Here we have Tom Horn, ladies and gentlemen. Tom, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you.
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, thanks for inviting me back on your show again.
Hey, thanks for coming back after last time.
Well, you know, over a period of time, the wounds tend to heal.
Right.
Well, that's good. Oh, man. Now, last time, we're going to kind of breeze right into this without any real segues because...
as if it's a continuation
of part one. Yeah, and we'll just call this part two.
Right.
You were talking about the Watchers. Can you tell our listeners what you were referring to?
Well, you mentioned that film by Louis Gossett Jr. and Cloud 10 Pictures and all that. I had actually been on a radio show with Dr. Stan Monteith, and we were talking about that film. Stan was one of the first people who invited me on. He participated in Cloud 10 Pictures promotion of that movie, and so I was on his show, and we were talking about that film. And in the film, it depicts these people that develop this telekinetic, transhumanist power, and in the film it turns out that they're acquiring that power because they're putting themselves in league with these invisible ancient spirits and forces. And of course, right away, I'm thinking of the Nephilim and things like that. And so while I was on the show, I asked Monteith. I said, you're a retired medical doctor. What do you see happening? I mean, do you think there's really anything to transhumanism? Do you think that we'll develop people someday that have telekinetic power, other things like that? Is that just, is it fiction, or, I mean, are we talking about being 100 years away from it, or is it right around the corner? Are we going to be using biotechnology and genetic engineering and so on to actually alter people? And Stan, he actually started crying, and he told me this story about this medical field convention that he had just returned from, in which they were discussing some of those very issues, and it had upset him so much because of his faith in God and the Bible that he thought we were stepping over some boundaries, and he wasn't sure, how long God was going to put up with that. And so anyway, after that show, I started compiling all of these research papers, things I think we talked about the last time, anything I could get my hands on, as well as trying to make contacts with actual people that are involved in biotechnology, anybody that was willing to talk to me to tell me, what was real, what was fantastic, what was probable, and really what was imminent. Where did they see this whole imminent edge of post-humanity, proto-humans, going to? And along the way, as I was compiling all of this information, I was going to write a nonfiction book, and I ran into an old college professor friend of mine that told me if I wanted to reach the largest group of people that I should take whatever the ethics, whatever the philosophical questions were that I had about, eugenics, neurophysic enhancement, and all of that, and that I should put it in the form of fiction. And so I'm not very creative with fiction. My wife is, so I brought her on board to help me with developing the plot line, the characters, and I guess in the end we turned out a pretty good book. It's become the #1 all-time best-selling book for the publisher. It's got something like 50 five-star reviews now, so I'm happy about that. But the thing, to get to your question, the thing that was most thrilling for me was I love research, and I love kind of turning over the stones and finding something where it's that wow moment, where it's that, this finally makes sense to me. And I began turning over this redundant telling down through time. Every continent I looked at, every piece of ancient history I looked at, as far back into the beginning of their histories as I could go, I was finding this story. And each one of them are telling it in their own way, but it was a redundant story about how the gods had come down and tinkered with the human race, intermarriage or messing with their DNA, whatever, but that they were using these living species to actually give birth to offspring or to incarnate themselves into our material world. And so I started seeing this as kind of a record in history of what we were now proposing to do through transgenic science, through the blending of species and the creating of superintelligences. And so right away then, I thought, here's these stories, different civilizations that speak of the Watchers and how these gods came down and used human material, DNA, to incarnate themselves, the Genesis 6, they saw the daughters of Adam, that they were fit extensions, something that they could use to extend themselves into our world. And what I found was that from the earliest records of Sumerian mythology, all the way forward to modern UFO knots and alien abduction stories, there was this mythos surrounding this event that began providing to me what I thought was the closest thing to empirical evidence for what you might consider documentation, something you might use in a court of law to make a case that there was an event, maybe a supernatural event that had happened. And then some of the supporting documentation was not only that mythology had been told in different cultures, but then you had this very real event where out of early Mesopotamia and all around the world at the same time, suddenly there was this explosive change where populations around the world went from being hunter-gatherers to having advanced civilizations that had complicated mathematics and astronomy and science and these engineering capabilities that were phenomenal, where they could build these observations and towers and pyramids with, by the way, astounding similarity, which also goes to the idea that this was a single event or a single period of time in which a global event occurred, perhaps from the same intelligences, and that they had contacted the human race and intervened in what an evolutionist might think of as our evolution, which goes to the whole ancient astronaut theory. But no matter how you interpret it, there was an event that happened. And among the most well-developed of those societies, there were these sacred record keepers. Some people call them cargo cults, some people call them holy men, prophets, historians, whatever, but they wrote down this starting moment and concerned themselves with what had happened and who had suddenly descended through the gates of heaven and involved themselves, come down on tall mountains, come down on tall towers, come down on rope ladders. The stories are almost identical, and took this antediluvian race, and they began to extend themselves. Now, the research that I uncovered into that story, and I'll move past this point, but this was Assyrian, this was Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, all of these great mythologies that told the stories of the gods who came down. But here was the part that was interesting to me, because I was studying transgenics. They had this need in order to materialize, to take three-dimensional expression. They had this need to blend different species in order to create this pathway, this portal through which they extended themselves into our three-dimensional reality. For instance, such ancient books as the book of Jasher, which is referred to in the Bible, in the book of Joshua and in 2 Samuel, says this. Jasher 4:8 says, quote, "After the fallen angels went into the daughters of men, the sons of men taught the mixture of animals of one species with another," end quote. And so I started finding these little references, and of course that's also in the book of Enoch and other, where you find that pattern. And then I started comparing it to the testimonials of modern ufology, an alien abduction phenomenon, where you have almost this same story over and over again. The ancient watchers were doing what modern abduction phenomenon includes, and that is this fact that what some ufology researchers have referred to as vital energy that's associated with three-dimensional life forms seem to be required as a construct material for achieving incarnation by these other dimensional beings. Now, for people of faith, me being among the clergy and writing in this circle, not about this subject, but writing in the evangelical community for many years, I ran into people right away, some of my friends even, that had a real problem with this idea.
Oh, yeah.
Backing up a little bit there, is that to say that the ancient myths of, for example, heroics, creatures like, the centaur, the minotaur, and also things like the Grendel and Gilgamesh and Enkidu, these myths are just rife with heroic beings and also very wicked beings at the same time? I mean, are these manifestations, is this what you're talking about? Are these like the actual products of this mixture, so to speak?
Now, there are people who place very literal interpretations on some of that. Eric von Daniken, guys like that, they've even reproduced some of the ancient steles in their books that show these Babylonian texts and carvings that seem to show different, people walking along with these animals that might have the body of a lion, the head of a man. There's one famous one where the creature's even sucking its thumb, and they point to that as being as illustrating that there was genetic modification that was going on of living species. I tend to think that that's true in some cases, and but I also know that in mythology a lot of times the characterizations, the images, are meant to depict magical properties of the various gods. And so you would not want to take every ancient depiction of a god with wings and the head of a falcon and the body of a lion and whatever, and necessarily interpret that as being a depiction of those creatures. And also keep in mind that one would think that unless the properties of these beings were also entirely different than what our skeletal, our bodies are and the animals that we know are, you would think that you would find a large amount of remains. I realize that in some cases remains of giants have been found down through time, and that may be some indication of the Nephilim. So I guess what I would say is that I think in some cases it could be, probably in most cases, the depictions of these creatures as being kind of a amalgamation of various different living specimens might have went to their magical properties, and it may have also went to the fact that they were blending these species, and so the people who were recording that history were in their own way creating a record that depicted what these creators, if you want to put it that way, what they were doing. Now, my point, though, so I don't forget this point about people in the faith community having a problem with the fact that these beings could create life. What I see in the Bible is this record that the Creator is the only one that can speak. The Hebrew word is Hayah, can speak and command that raw atomic nuclear energy come forth out of nothingness into specified molecular forms. But it was after the fact that these beings did the same thing that these genetic researchers are doing today with creating rabbit human clones, that these beings now could take that created molecular matter and manipulate it. These gods were manipulating this matter in order to create something that they could incarnate themselves into. And I have a suspicion that it has something to do with the fact that when God the Creator created all life forms and created the human race, and he stood back and he said, "It is very good." He created man. He says, "It is very good." And the Hebrew word there is ta'ud. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. But it's more than just it's very good in the sense that it's pretty or artistic. It's very good in the sense that this being is something different than all other living organisms in that this is something into which my spirit can dwell. That's borne out also in the New Testament. Know ye not that you are temples of the Holy Spirit. Now, some people might argue that, in animism or other things that maybe God does that with trees and animals and whatever, but I can only say that from my worldview and from a study of the Hebrew text, this is the only place where God refers, as far as I know, to his Holy Spirit taking up habitation inside of one of his creations. And when I look at that, I think that this is why the watchers, these powerful angels that, according to Enoch, the 200, they left their habitation. They came down to earth. They lusted after women, but something more than that. They wanted to incarnate themselves, and in order to do that, they had to change the human species from being a temple of the Holy Spirit. It had to change it from being something that was accommodating to the Spirit of God to something that could never be accommodating to the Spirit of God. And they had to break these species barriers. And it's interesting that in the Old Testament and the Levitical law and all of the rest of it, you see these very potent laws that are given by God where each species is to reproduce after its own kind. And it was God himself that put these barriers in place and says that these species can't reproduce after another kind. And the watchers broke those rules. They broke those laws, and they did something that was unforgivable. And they created something that was three-dimensional, that was of flesh, but that they could incarnate themselves into. A little bit later, if we get a chance, I'll show you some other texts that I think bore out why this was the reason, and how the dead spirits of Nephilim, the Rephaim, were also able to reincarnate themselves according to the ancient texts over and over again, and some of them came great kings. And I think that's partly also why, when you look at the Sumerian, the Hebrew, the Hittite, the Babylonian, the Assyrians, these people were terrified of the Watchers and also the sons of the Watchers. The Egyptians were horrified that at death they were going to be judged by by the 42 judges that come of the Watchers, so
now
they would create these magic incantations on Earth to protect them from these beings coming through dimensional portals, which is evidently what they learned by what either they or their parents or their great-grandparents or whatever had observed and had recorded. And it's interesting that universally you'll see where celestial openings on Earth, gateways on Earth, are understood to be symbolic of celestial openings or stargates or portals through which either dark influences or light influences might seek entry, and therefore it was important to use imitative magic for protecting yourself against those undesirable entities in your homes and your cities. That's why even today you'll see people putting candles in their windows and blessing the doorposts of their homes and things like that. This goes back to the first times when they observed something, and it so frightened them that they created these elaborate construction ceremonies. You go back and look at the cities, the ancient cities of the Assyrians, and they're flanked. Their openings to their cities are flanked by these colossal transgenic magic creatures that are supposed to protect those gates and palaces from, and even homes from these undesirable forces coming through those gateways. And they would even bury these powerful magical creatures underneath the walkway that you had to walk over the top of to come through the gateway to try to hold back these powerful forces.
Now, Tom, I've got a question for you. First of all, these sons of these Nephilim creations, these sons that were, I guess, half human and half not human. What happened to them? As far as I'm assuming that from what you're saying, that there's no way that they could be endowed with any kind of spirit that lived on, as far as a Holy Spirit or anything like that. I mean, what happens to them? Are they, do they die and become nothing, or are they
no.
part of the a demonic kind of creation?
Well, actually, as I interpret the ancient record, and it's not based on any one text, but a collection of many texts, including the Ras Shamra and some other ancient Assyrian texts, the record is actually that their spirits existed in the first place. According to Enoch and the Old Testament, these beings that moved through these portals and used vital energy as a construct material for forming some pathway. It's important to look at those texts because these are texts that are also quoted in the Bible, in the book of Jude, the book of Peter. But Enoch appears to told the same story where he's talking about animals and humans being manipulated. And Enoch says in Enoch 7, I believe, that the Watchers sinned against the animals in the same way they sinned against the humans. And so you first ask yourself, I'm going to get to answer your question here, but you first ask yourself the reason if Watchers were involving themselves with humans only because of their beauty. If it was just lust, like we think, being attracted to pretty women or whatever, if that was the case, then what was this blending with plants and animal DNA and human DNA all about? And by the way, I tell people that you have to admit that even if the ancient stories of lore are nothing more than that, if they're nothing more than fiction or myth, the metaphorical resemblance to parts of transhumanism today and what we're doing today, I mean, even the secular press has taken to using terms like chimera from Greek mythology when referring to transhumanism, and the chimera was a hybrid beast that breathed fire and foreshadowed natural disasters. And some people think that what's happening in transhumanism today is it's a good use of that metaphor because transgenically blending species and living organisms today might be a repeat of what was going on back then. Now, to your question, as I understand what was going on with the story that Enoch told and the story that Jasher told and the book of Genesis, that these were powerful angelic beings, left their estate, came down to the earth, intermingled with the human species, and there was offspring. The sons of God saw the daughters of Adam, that they were fit extensions. They took themselves wives of all which they chose, and in that day there were giants in the earth, and also after that. And that little piece of scripture is very interesting in that we get a depiction that before the flood there was this offspring, both Nephilim and also Gibborim. Now, some scholars say that the Gibborim are identical to the Nephilim. It's the same, a different word, maybe perhaps from a different tribe that was describing the same beings, and it became kind of a universally known term. Then there's others that say, because the indication behind Gibborim is mighty, that these were the offspring of the Nephilim. So you had the Watchers who gave birth to the Nephilim, who gave birth to the Gibborim, and in any case, by the time you reached the time of Noah, through intermarriage, you had essentially polluted the entire gene pool, and God had to destroy the whole earth. And yet after the flood, the biblical record is the giants came back again. Now, we can talk about a whole variety of ancient text, if you like, that indicate that these beings, and in particular from both the Hebrew Old Testament and also the Rosh Hashanah text, the Amorite text, the word that is used is Rephaim. When the Nephilim are described as dead, and according to the Bible, when their spirits go into hell, they are thereafter referred to as Rephaim. The interesting part about that is that Rephaim carries with it the meaning to heal, as in a resurrection. And the Rosh Hashanah ascribed to the Rephaim that they were the acolyte underworld assembly who worshipped the Amorite god Baal, but that if given the right circumstances, they could actually come back from the dead and reincarnate themselves once again into other personalities. And so if as we go along tonight, we can talk about a lot of those different references if you like, but that's essentially, that's the record as I understand it, that their spirits did not cease to exist, but they could not have redemption, according to Enoch. And so the Bible says they went into hell in full battle dress. And in hell, they become the servants of the underworld with the potential to also rise from the dead. And by the way, I believe that there's prophecies in the Bible that tell us at the end of time, when Iraq is invaded and destroyed by foreign forces, according to the prophet Isaiah, God is going to give a command, gates are going to open, and the Rephaim are going to reincarnate into the giants, and they're going to return in the end of time.
Wow.
That's
well, Tom,
pretty heavy. Yeah.
I hate to put the brakes on here, but we're going to have to take a short break. So for those of you listening, please stay tuned. You can give us a call here and speak with us and Tom Horn, 877-722-7382. That's 877-SCARE-YOU2. Give us a call here in the studio. Speak live with.
Every Halloween at midnight, the devil simultaneously appears in two places: the high plains of India and a quiet cemetery in Kansas. It's November 2nd, the Day of the Dead. Two federal marshals report to the small town of Shinbone, Kansas, moments after a tornado warning, to transport a prisoner with no past, no identity. He is known only as Sin Jin Smith. Starring Roddy Piper, Richard Tyson, Jonathan Davis, Kevin Gage, Gary Casper, John Philbin, Billy Duffy, Charles Cypers, and Eileen Dietz. Check out the movie that critics are calling one of 2007's most anticipated horror films by visiting www.sinjinsmith.com. That's www.sin-jinsmyth.com. St. Jin Smith is a Snapkick Productions film, written and directed by Ethan Detmeyer. Coming soon to a theater near you.
And we're back on World of the Unexplained.
And we have a caller.
So, exactly.
I'm sorry, Scott.
It's okay.
Teamwork, baby.
Go ahead.
Caller, what's your name?
There.
Hey.
Hi, it's Phyllis from Chicago.
Hey, Phyllis.
Sorry to make you wait like that.
Oh, no problem. I was having a ball listening in. Mr. Horn, it is an absolute privilege to be able to talk to you. I'm just devoted to your website. I take a look every day.
Oh, well, thank you, Phyllis.
I was actually listening to some of what Stephen Quayle has been saying. You mentioned giants before the show went to break, and you know he has a lot of theories about giants and how they actually do exist even in modern times. I was wondering, you know, what are your thoughts on that? And also, I understand that you were prevented from actually being on his radio show.
Well, there was a day last year. There was an event where I did one show, and you know, as you may or may not know, I have a friend who dates back to my father. My father was a police officer. He was also involved with intelligence, and he was also involved in military intelligence. And he had a couple of friends, and when I started writing about transgenics, one of these guys that I hadn't heard of for years, actually a guy that I was kind of afraid of when I was a kid, I didn't think I really wanted to hear from him either. And he contacted me, and he said, you know, I read, and I didn't even know this guy knew who I was anymore, but he said, I read one of your editorials, and if you want to know where this is going, give me a call. And so I got in contact with him, and he helped me understand how the military is interested in some of biotechnology and where some of this might be going, and actually gave me some good information that might make some of the science in the book believable. Some of that was actually edited out later on. But he also shared some private information with me. And the very first show that I did with Steve Quayle, Steve evidently has a friend who knows somebody that somehow connects down the line to the I call him Phobos in the book, and in the book his character is so changed that nobody would ever be able to identify who he is, but the character is actually based on him. And the next night I went on Quayle's show to do the show. I was supposed to be back on the next night because we ran out of time, and right when I was supposed to go on the air, my phone rang. I thought it was Quayle for the show, and it was this other person, and they actually kept me on the line and wouldn't disconnect the phone from the line because they were afraid that I was going to say some things I wasn't supposed to say.
Wow.
Which wasn't the case, because I wouldn't do that to him, and furthermore, I value my life. And, so I didn't have any intentions of doing that, but that's probably what you're referring to, and that did happen, yes. And it was that same night, and I didn't know this till after the show went off, but because I couldn't go on the air, Steve Quayle the next day, he had Stan Deo do a computer drill down to show who had been logged on to Steve's to his radio programs that night on his streaming services, and he found out that there were these thousands and thousands of government computers that had logged onto his show all at the same time. And I mean, there were 500 of them just from the Pentagon alone. And I asked Steve, had you ever seen that before? And I asked Deo, have you ever seen this before? And both of them said, we've never seen anything like that before. So that was kind of that made all of us nervous for a couple of days.
I can understand that.
I imagine so. Well, thank you very much for taking my call, guys. And Mr. Horn, thank you for answering the questions, and God bless you. Take care.
Well, God bless you, too.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay.
You too.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks.
I said Pam. I meant Phyllis. I don't know why I'm thinking
Phyllis.
Pam. I know why I'm thinking Pam. It's because she sits in our chat room a lot, and her initials are PMD, and for some reason Pam just popped into my head.
Well, listen, I'm going to take it into a weird direction just for a minute, but it's a question that kind of lingers in my head a lot. Basically, we're talking about transgenic crossbreeds, I guess, between interstellar beings and taking the form of physical creatures. Now, you look at the mythology, and I'm a pretty big fan of most mythologies, and consistently we see at some point or another you see these monstrous beings. For example, Goliath, the Minotaur, the dragon in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Grendel from Beowulf, and every time they're paired up with some other human. For example, Theseus with the Minotaur, Gilgamesh and Enkidu with the dragon, Beowulf with Grendel, David and Goliath. Basically humans. And in the myths, these humans slay the beasts. They take them down, whatever they may be. What's your take on that, Tom?
Well, it's the same thing as I was saying earlier. And what you note when you look into those mythologies is that there are so many similar patterns.
Right.
About how these different gods, whether you're talking about Zeus or whether you're talking about some other god from some other piece of mythology, what their relationship was with the human race, what they were doing, and it is my contention, it could be disputed, of course, by people that don't agree with me, but it is my contention that these various cultures were recording in their own way this event about the Watchers that descended on Hebron, came down, and used matter as an act of rebellion against God, and created these wholly different transgenic life forms, which became the Nephilim. The interesting thing about this, too, is if you just read the Old Testament, it's ironic that God, who is otherwise depicted as being long-suffering and patient, not willing that any should perish, and this is true also in the Old Testament. He even commanded, you remember, the Israelites had to be hospitable to strangers coming inside.
Right.
Yeah.
People that might want to convert to the Jewish faith had to be allowed to do so even if they weren't born of that lineage. So there's all these laws that tell us about God, even in the Old Testament before Christ, how much he was willing to embrace any truth seeker and bring them in and allow them to be saved. And yet, when you look at the Nephilim, not true. They were to be killed on the spot.
And to be destroyed.
There was just this universal death warrant that was placed on these beings that separated them from every other kind of humanity which God had ever spoke of. So there was certainly something there that changed them from beings who could be redeemed. And there again, you go back to the book of Enoch. It talks about these Watchers and how the Watchers begged, according to the book of Enoch, for redemption, but no redemption is offered. You cannot be saved. You are condemned to eternal damnation. So. So I think I got offline. I would just simply say to people that, in my opinion, when you take the record of ancient lore and mythos, you don't have to agree with me, but it is easy to understand how people of reasonable faith and scholarship could see that as being an event where super intelligent beings were using a kind of science to alter a species so that they could use the species for some kind of diabolical purpose. And now you forward into the present day, and you look at the serious research that's been done by people who they've put their names and reputation, John Mack, guys like that, put their names and reputation on the line to talk about a subject matter that other people were simply not willing to talk about because they were afraid that it might cast some aspersion on the seriousness of their research. But these were guys, some of them are award-winning scientists, some of them are Nobel electorates, but they were willing to say there seems to be something here, and we're getting this testimony from thousands of people around the world and down through time who are telling this same story, and they're still telling it today, that there are these beings that come through, and for whatever reason, they want to harvest human eggs. They want to use human blood. There's these UFO flap areas where people will literally disappear, and animals will disappear, and it seems to be that there's this need to take this matter. Now, what are they doing with the matter? I don't know, but this is where I make the leap in my logic. In the book, the Ahriman Gate, I do it in fiction, but in my own life, for personal reasons, which we talked about, I think, in the first broadcast.
That's right.
I try to understand what is going on here with this phenomenon, and I can't help, when I look at what's happening with biotechnology today and transgenics today, to say it might just be the world's biggest coincidence. But what scientists are proposing to do now is astonishing. Even before the writing of my book, The Ahriman Gate, my research started taking me to the door of these futuristic technology experts. And then after the book came out, and I was doing these radio shows, pretty soon I was doing sometimes as much as 8 hours a day, by the way, on different radio shows. Tonight I'm doing 4 hours, 2 hours on your show, 2 hours on another one. Tomorrow night I'm doing 4 more hours. Next night 4 more hours. And this has been going on now for months, and I don't ever want to say no to anybody, so I do it if I can. But some of the shows that I'm doing now are not with, you guys joked earlier about being hard on me on the first program, but you guys are great, man. I mean, I'm on shows now where I'm on with transhumanists. And they want to know, what my problem is, and I'm willing to do it. I was on with Dr. James Hughes not long ago, Change Surfer Radio. And Hughes, he's the executive director for the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He's a bioethicist. He's a sociologist that teaches at Trinity College in Hartford. He sits on the board at Yale University and some other universities. And Dr. Hughes and I mean, we couldn't possibly be from more diametrically different world views. He's a leading transhumanist. There was an article about him just this week that was in New Science magazine where he was promoting that. We ran the article at Raiders News Update and put our own different kind of headline on it like we usually do. And right away I got email about that.
I can imagine.
When we go live with our own radio broadcast next year, I'll have him come on, and we'll talk to him about some of these issues. But
when is that going to be, Tom? When is your tell us a little bit about your new radio thing and when?
Well, we're still building our studio. We own our own acre of commercial land. We're building a studio on part of that land. And we've got some of the equipment now. I can't believe what these microphones cost. I'm not wearing them.
Oh, they're crazy. Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It kills me. Just, hundreds of dollars a piece, and I got to buy a half dozen of them, so that kills me. But then the board time, and you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, we do.
So all this other stuff that I've got to do, and I'm this old guy, I used to be involved with Trinity Broadcasting Network, and I had a radio show and a television program 25 years ago on the West Coast. And back in those days...
Were you asking for money in the middle of the night, Tom?
What's that?
I said, were you asking for donations in the middle of the night?
No, I don't think I ever did.
Okay, good.
I was pastoring a church that was financially well off, and they underwrote, all those costs.
Right.
But I mean, I still remember driving to the tower, and I would go inside the building there and wear these gigantic headphones, and this was reel-to-reel tape, if that gives you any idea about how far along back this was. And we had a 100,000-watt radio tower, and it would shoot our program all the way down in from Mexico to Canada and all along that mountain range there. And this was back when Southwest Radio Church was in its heyday, and Emil Gaverluck and all those guys. So I'm not sure how I got off on that, but that was then. Now I'm coming back and I start talking to some of my friends about. I feel like the timing is right. I'm going to go back on the radio again. And they start talking to me about the technology, and I am just so lost. Go get my son. You'd say, help, I don't get it.
It's changed a lot.
So,
yeah.
But we're hoping sometime after the first of the year, maybe mid-January, the end of January, we'll go live. But so that I don't get off track, I was telling you about James Hughes and I. And here's the thing. We both agreed on the last show that I did with him that mankind, even though we're both from different worldviews, we both agreed to this fact that mankind is standing now on the cusp of a radical future where the integration of enhancement technology, especially those technologies that are related to biotechnology, are right now going to take the human race dramatically forward or backward, depending on your point of view, into a place that no recent generation has ever seen before. And I can't emphasize to people enough that this is a point of view based on having the opportunity to talk to the leading principals in the world, as far as I know, at our higher institutions of education, and including people from the president's former council on bioethics. All of them are saying that now we are going to move into a post-human condition. Even the National Geographic ran an article, it was about a year ago now, in which they said that it wouldn't even be 10 years before humans as we know them are going to cease to be the sole higher intelligent occupiers of planet Earth. And if you saw our Raiders News Network, I think it was either today or yesterday, where Donna put up the John Templeton Foundation story, where they're providing $500,000 to Arizona State University for a whole series of lectures to evaluate the fact that now we're embarking on what they call large-scale genetic neurological engineering of ourselves, and this is being viewed by these serious academics as the next chapter in evolution. And if you go to nickbostrom.com or any of these people who are leading thinkers in this field, you'll find out that they're looking at this whole accelerating developments in the field of genomics, stem cell research, genetic enhancement, germline engineering, neuropharmacology, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, robotic assistance, pattern recognition technology, all of that as right now the gates are open. And as far as legislation, which the president, about a year and a half ago in one of his speeches, he called for legislation to be enacted that would prohibit the development of human-animal chimeras. Do you remember that?
Yeah, vaguely.
Well, it hasn't happened, and for that matter, it's not going to happen universally, and so even if you get some piece of legislation in the U.S., it'd be just like if one state outlaws abortion and people go across the border to get abortion. Same thing's going to be true in outlawing certain kinds of human-animal chimeric research. It may be outlawed in some places, but you look at Missouri, they just approved it. So the bottom line is there's going to be places in the world that are going to allow this kind of developmental research. And, in fact, you might even think back in April or May of this year, just a few months ago, where Case Law School in Cleveland received $773,000 from the National Institutes of Health. So this is a government grant for the purposes of developing guidelines for the use of human subjects. Subjects. This is not computer animation. Real human subjects being used for what they were calling the next frontier in medical technology, and this is already happening. Genetic enhancement of the human species by, in some cases, genetic reengineering and crossbreeding with other species other than human. And it's the professor of law and bioethics, Max Melham, there at Case Law School, that's actually leading a whole team of law professors, physicians, bioethicists in this 2-year project that's already 6 months into it now for one purpose only, and that is establishing the guidelines that will be used for altering the human species through genetic enhancement. And it was the president's own former chairman of the Council on Bioethics, Leon Cass, who said that we are standing right now on the definition of what it means to be a human, and he said in some cases what it means to be a proto-human or even a god. And if you want to read an interesting book, he's the guy that sat on the President's Council on Bioethics and reviewed all of the leading technology and where it's going and what all of the academics are saying we're doing, as well as our law schools who are developing now the rules and laws that will be used for protecting these transhumans and extending to them the protections that are in the Constitution. And if you read his book, he literally says that human nature is now on the operating table, not someday in the future, now. It's being altered through eugenics, neurophysic enhancement, all of it, wholesale redesign of the human species, and he says that anybody that cares about this needs to get on the front of the envelope now, because this is not theoretical, it's already happening, and probably within the next 6 to 7 years, you will have human beings walking around you that are not human at all, like you and me. These will be creations that will be part human and part other species.
Wonderful.
My goodness.
Tom, we're going to have to take another break.
Second break.
Second break of the night. Call us here, 877-722-7382, to speak with Tom Horn tonight on World of the Unexplained.
Oswell, UFOs, flying saucers, alien abduction. Are we alone? Information regarding this and many other questions about the unknown are only a click away at www.theufostore.com. Theufostore.com offers hundreds of DVDs about UFOs, aliens, crop circles, conspiracies, Bigfoot, suppressed science, ancient mysteries, and the latest DVD releases like Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs and the Alien Files 5 DVD set. Theufostore.com also offers the book Roswell, It Really Happened by Jesse Marcel, one of the last survivors of the Roswell UFO crash that examined the spacecraft wreckage in 1947, revealing its hidden secrets. Log on to www.theufostore.com and request a free UFO Store catalog. To receive a free catalog by mail, call 541-523-2630. That's 541-523-2630. Theufostore.com, the largest selection of UFO products on the internet.
Every Halloween at midnight, the devil simultaneously appears in two places: the high plains of India and a quiet cemetery in Kansas. It's November 2nd, the Day of the Dead. Two federal marshals report to the small town of Shinbone, Kansas, moments after a tornado warning, to transport a prisoner with no past, no identity. He is known only as Sin Jin Smith. Starring Roddy Piper, Richard Tyson, Jonathan Davis, Kevin Gage, Gary Casper, John Philbin, Billy Duffy, Charles Cypers, and Eileen Dietz. Check out the movie that critics are calling one of 2007's most anticipated horror films by visiting www.sinjinsmith.com. That's www.sin-jinsmyth.com. St. John Smith is a Snapkick Productions film, written and directed by Ethan Detmeyer. Coming soon to a theater near you.
And we're back with World of the Unexplained with Tom Horn. If you want to talk to Tom Horn tonight, the number again is 1-877-722-7382 or 1-877-SCARE-U2. The local number is 1-336-996-1596. And don't forget about our chat room. Just log in and make up a name and ask a question there if you're phone shy.
That's right. Now, I want to ask you a question, Tom. I mentioned this earlier, and that was the fact that you were referring to the Book of Enoch and a lot of these other books that were left out of the historical canon of the Old Testament. How do you distinguish between which books you use and which books you don't? How do you lend credibility to one over the other?
Well, for me, it really comes down to a couple of very simple things that the books are quoted in the Bible. For instance, you'll notice tonight I quoted Jasher, which is quoted in the Old Testament book of Joshua and 2 Samuel. I also quoted Enoch, which is quoted in the books of Peter and Jude in the New Testament. And for that matter, the book of Enoch was part of the first church Bible. It was only later removed over a debate by the church concerning whether they could prove authenticity of authorship, things like that. But so for me, I'm a lot more comfortable quoting pseudepigrapha, apocryphal books that are referred to in the Bible, and then other books, I use them only if for no other reason to illustrate to me what the belief system was, the folklore of the culture or the time, and if there's a harmony. This is one of the things in biblical interpretation is you look for what's called harmony of text. And so if you hear many writers saying the same thing, it increases the credibility that whatever the situation is in that case, whether it's a piece of history, whether it's a supernatural phenomenon, whatever, that it becomes more believable the number of people who are reporting the same activity or repeating the same activity. But for me, there are extra biblical books that are also very old books that I certainly don't subscribe the same level of scholarship to as I would the books that I've quoted tonight. And I always try to be very careful that the ones that I quote, even though I see them only as support documents to the Bible, but the only ones that I quote are usually the ones that are also in the Bible. If that's not the case, I'll usually say, now this wasn't quoted in the Bible, it might not be real, but the language and the story seems to harmonize with these other pieces of Scripture.
Right, so you're looking for consistencies amongst the amongst the text when you're talking about
substantive text, supportive text.
Right. Okay, well, going back to the what we were talking about before the break, I guess one of my questions is, what benefit does any government, for that matter, have in developing these proto-humans? Obviously, there's a lot of danger involved in it. I can't imagine that these people who are pushing this issue can't see the fact that if you develop humanity to like a higher level while you yourself don't have that same level, that there is a danger that these newly evolved humans will simply just turn around and take over. You know,
enslave us.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, when they have abilities that we don't possess, clearly there's a danger there. So really, what benefit does any government, ours or anyone else in the world, what benefit do they have in developing these technologies?
Well, you have to keep in mind that many of these people don't have the same worldview that you and I do, and transhumanists, in particular, see this. They're fairly irritated, to put it mildly, by guys like me. They see us as neo-Luddites or against, scientific advances that might contribute to the overall welfare of the human race. And in fact, when I was on Coast to Coast just recently, I was asked that question by somebody that called in. You're talking about all this stuff, but do you think there could be any benefits to humanity that come out of biotech? And I said, well, of course. I mean, there could be benefits, and I made just a quick analysis that, for instance, if I had a tumor in my body, and if I went into, your local genetic engineering lab in the near future, and they took a piece of that tumor out of me, and they were able to genetically alter the tumor itself and turn it into kind of a time bomb, and then inject that back into me. As long as all of those properties were a part of me to start with, it would be nothing more than kind of an advanced method of what we do right now in terms of trying to combat cancers and things like that. Every kind of drug that an individual takes is an effort to try to either increase your own immunity, and your immunity tries to do those same things. So I said, yeah, in that kind of a circumstance, as long as you're not altering me as a species, sure, there could be some benefits to biotech. Now, the military, of course, DARPA, they have interest in biotech, and they have interest even in genetically altering humans in the future combat soldiers. DARPA has at times, I think they've removed a lot of this from their website now because it came under some heat for it, but they've actually printed articles, which I think you can go to Google or Yahoo and type in things like the Extended Warfighter program, things like that, and you'll come up with some of the original publications from DARPA where they were talking about genetically enhancing soldiers so that soldiers could fight on end and things like that. And so here's the deal. Unfortunately, I think that we're racing ahead. And we're modifying crops. Now we're modifying humans. Now we're also transgenically creating animal-human embryos because we believe that these new creations are somehow going to open the door. And to answer your question, that's why they do it. They think it's going to open the door either to a better evolution of the species or for the development of a medicine that might cure some ailment of the human race. And so now we have moth genes that are being fused with potatoes. You have pigs that are being given human growth genes. You've got fish that are being implanted with cattle growth genes. You've got tomatoes that are being bred with flounders. You've got all these things that are happening where we are crossing these species barriers. And so far what we're learning through genetically modified crops is that they do unpredictable things. We can't tell what they're going to do ahead of the case. People who are living downwind from some of these pollens are developing respiratory problems and things like that we're not even sure how we're going to deal with these diseases, and yet, I mean, we're just running full speed ahead, and what people need to realize is that, like with these food products, I don't think people know that, like Monsanto's, some of Monsanto's products are being sold at Albertsons, Safeway. These things are already on the shelf. And the FDA is allowing the producers of these products to do their own testing. And then the FDA accepts the reports of these corporations at face values that their biotech creations are safe. And to answer your question, in the end, I hope that we're not going to wind up learning the brundlefly lesson. I think I made this reference maybe before, either on this show or another one, but you recall that old movie, The Fly?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And you got this scientist, Seth Brundle, who's conducting teleportation experiments, but he accidentally has his DNA combined with a housefly during one of those teleportation experiments. And then soon afterward in the film, he starts becoming this superhuman. He starts becoming this James Hughes' transhumanist dream. I mean, the guy's lightning fast. He's shooting all over the room. He's got heightened senses, heightened hearing, heightened eyesight, superhuman power. He's got the sexual proclivities of an African lion, Yeah. But then something happens, and he turns into a monster. Now, James Goldblum, who was the actor that played that in the remake of that movie, The Fly, he also starred in Jurassic Park as Ian Malcolm.
Right.
I can't get this picture of Ian Malcolm out of my mind where they're racing down this road, and here's this T-Rex that's chasing them, and the only thing on Ian Malcolm's mind is he wants to know who thought it was a good idea to bring back these extinct species, And now here's an important point for people to make. Let's say you're not a Christian, you don't subscribe to my worldview, you don't look at things the way I do. But if you're an evolutionist, if you're a secularist, if you're a Darwinist, if you're an atheist, whatever, you have to look at this science and look at it the way Ian Malcolm does in Jurassic Park, where you say somewhere the brakes need to be put on, because whether you subscribe to chaos theory or whatever, if evolution selectively decided to remove those organisms from the earth years ago, and as a Christian, when I say that, I think in terms also of the Nephilim. If evolution or God or chaos or whatever decided that it's not a good idea to have these things on the earth anymore, and the environment that was required to sustain those living organisms is not even here anymore, then shouldn't we be very careful about what the impact on the current environment might be by bringing these beings back to life? Well, of course, if you are a Christian, or even if you're just somebody that happens to believe in the supernatural, and you look at all of these ancient texts as being a record indicative of your own supernatural beliefs, you have to ask yourself the question if tinkering with the unknown is a good idea. Because what we're finding out is there may well, in fact, be super intelligence there. And maybe they are even confined behind barriers and have been since the last few thousand years. And by tinkering with these pathways, these portals, we may open a gateway in our mind, in our world. And does this sound like do I sound like a crazy person?
No.
We may open doorways, and once these things come through, we may wish we wouldn't have done that. And in his own way, that's what Ian Malcolm was saying in Jurassic Park.
Well, that's very true. And I would also point out the fact that you may be able to manipulate a human being into a faster healing, more physically capable kind of person, just like you were saying in The Fly, but you're not really changing their mental outlook. We still have sort of like the same inherent flaws, in my opinion, that we had, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. I mean, we haven't really changed that way. We still have the same kind of lusts and urges and, sort of psychological makeup. So it just seems like I don't know what a good analogy of it would be, But essentially, it just seems very dangerous.
Well, it might even be worse than that, Jay.
Well, that was Trent, but that's okay.
That was me.
What's that?
I said that was Trent that asked that, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because I have to really concentrate when you guys are talking.
It's okay. It happens a lot.
It's probably my technology, not yours. But
I don't know about that, Tom.
Go ahead.
Well, but think about this now, because if transhumanism, like Professor Bostrom and James Hughes and guys like that want to do, if by corrupting a species barrier, and now think back about the Nephilim, if in doing that, these beings, which the Creator said don't cross the species barrier, and then they did, and these beings were created, if that's what we're actually reading, and I believe that it is, I believe that is the record, then these watchers had either used a science or some other some form of technology that we're not aware of, and they had mingled, according to Enoch and others, human, animal, plant DNA, and they had created now the hereditary traits of those different species. When you said a moment ago that you could enhance me in these ways, but I would still be the same person, think the same way, I'm not sure. It might even be worse than our worst nightmare, because what happens when you start mingling these species into a new being, a Nephilim, that suddenly possesses the combined intelligence and instincts, the seeing and hearing and smelling and reacting to the environment of these different life forms. I bring this up because when I was doing research, one of the molecular biologists told me this. He said, here's the problem, that classifying the functions of genes, that is, what genes do, and we're decoding the human genome and so on. He said, classifying the functions of these genes, we do this within their native species. What we don't know and what we're unsure of is how the gene's coding might change, how it might react differently from one species to another. And he said there's chances that unpredictable things are going to begin to happen. Of course, we're seeing that right now in genetically modified crops. But when we wrote the Ahriman Gate, we focused on that, transgenics, because transgenics would be the science of not only altering the genetic structure, more faster, stronger, whatever, but transgenics might also alter the nature of a species by introducing the DNA of a different species into its genome. Think back about the Washington Post this year that wrote an article called Chimera, a Step Closer to Reality, in which they were referring to the research that had been done by Ivan Balaban, who works at the McGill University in Montreal. And Balaban had done this series of dramatic experiments in which he took small sections of brain from developing quails and had transplanted them into the developing brains of chickens. And the resulting chickens that he created were exhibited vocal trills and head bobs that were unique to quails. And what was important about this was that it proved that the transplanted parts of the brain actually contained the neural circuitry for quail calls, and more importantly, it offered proof that complex behavior could actually be transferred across species, from one species to another. Now, in his book, Screening DNA, Stephen Nottingham wrote something that, and I think this is very significant, very important. He was talking about how, and you guys will identify with this, you'll know this is true, how that hidden away in our brains, somewhere in our being, is this permanent record of our past, of our lives. All that we've ever perceived can potentially be recalled. You know how that in some extraordinary cases of involuntary memory can be triggered by a smell or a taste. I was driving down the road not long ago in my car, and when I was a teenager, I smoked cigarettes, and I haven't done that in decades, but this song came on the radio, and I'm driving in my car, and this song was a song that was really popular when I was in my teens and when I smoked. And I swear to you that the moment that song came on, I could smell cigarette smoke in my car.
Wow.
And this was, and you've probably had events in your life where some old song or some person you haven't seen for a long time, you suddenly come face to face with them, and you might feel the emotions or something that was there. You haven't thought about it in decades, but somehow
It's like the smell of an old girlfriend's perfume or something like that.
And it's recorded in this long-term memory. Now, here's why I bring this up. Long-term memory. How does long-term memory work? For a long time, scientists thought that there were these nerve cell connections that were being created by memory. But then other scientists came along and they pointed out what was fairly much the obvious, that the rapid turnover of molecules in the nervous system would almost seem to preclude the idea that these nerve cells were existing for through our entire lifetime and recording memory. So they were trying to figure out what part of our being, what part of our mind, brain, system, whatever, is maintaining this lifetime of memory. Well, recently in the last few years, neuroscientists have come along, and they are arguing now that long-term memory needs a stable blueprint, and that DNA might actually be what's supplying long-term memory, because permanent memories would be being recorded, if you will, in a way that's kind of similar to how our immune system remembers previous infections and can fight against it. Well, to just cut to the chase, here's the important part about this point. If that theory of DNA and memory is right, then guess what? Genetic engineering could inadvertently maybe, or intentionally maybe, transplant memories. Just like Balaban's neural circuitry of brain caused chickens to react in the ways that a quail would, transgenically altering a species could transplant the memories of one species to another. Now imagine what that might mean to a human animal in the future, where an individual who is one of these characters from the X-Men, what's that guy's name, the Wolverine or whatever, where you could have these nightmarish visions from the mind of a wolf. I mean, you would literally be talking, or at least theoretically, you would be talking about the creation of werewolves. You would be talking about the creation of lycanthropes, because it would be possible to extend to a human transhuman who is now part wolf the appetite, the bloodlust of a being that has an interest in consuming human blood or meat or animal byproducts. And so that's why when it comes to transhumanism, which I'm telling you is inevitable, not only is it inevitable, we're doing it now. In the public sector, we're doing it in ways that the public's reading about. Human, rabbit, embryos, things that we're talking about in genetic research. I'll just say this. I have reasons to believe that in SAPOC budgets, our government is certainly, for at least 10 years now, been ahead of this curve in investigating what the possibilities are of transgenically altering humans with animals, and think about what that could mean. Animals can do things we can't do. This is one of DARPA's interest in this. This is one of Nick Bostrom. If you go to nickbostrom.com, the Oxford PhD who's teaching these young skulls full of college mush about the future, he talks about these sensory modalities. And he talks about how the ones that we know are not the only ones that exist, and that how animals have a sense of smell, sharper insight, blah, 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 and they have an interest in creating humans that can do the same thing. Well, animals can sense earthquakes, smell tumors. Dogs can hear sounds at 40,000 hertz. Dolphins can hear them at 100,000 hertz. It's also known that some animals can see wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum that are beyond our human ability. Why is that important to me? Because we know that even according to the Bible, animals can see, at least in some cases, angels, beings of light, beings of darkness. The Bible tells the story of Balaam's donkey, where the donkey sees the angel with its sword drawn, going to take off dumb Balaam's head. Balaam can't see it, but the animal can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories out of the Old Testament.
And we do not know, therefore, what these transhuman creations of the near future are going to be able to do. I mean, I've got my book, The Ahriman Gate, where you read about the black lab called Tater.
Yeah.
But that's a real dog. He's my dog, Tater.
Oh, he is? I didn't know that was your dog.
Good old Tater.
So you're the old man with the raft out in the middle of the woods?
Yeah. Well, maybe old, in description.
Oh, yeah.
But I've seen Tater a couple of times reacting, at least what appears to me, reacting to something that isn't even there. And he's afraid of it.
Right. They have heightened senses easily.
Now, so when it comes to transhumanism and transgenics and exotic soldiers and weapons technology, imagine what this could mean, of government laboratories with unlimited budgets. Is this hard for you to believe?
No.
Working beyond congressional review. This is the history of the United States.
Above top secret or
black ops.
Above black ops,
We've done this hundreds of times. And sometimes only decades later we'll even admit to it so that the families of those we experimented on can't sue us.
Oh, yeah.
We've done it hundreds of times. Now, is it difficult now to believe that if what you can see on the surface, and there's so much of this news that we just have to turn our back on it. We do report on it almost every day at the RaidersNewsNetwork.com, but we could have the whole page could be filled almost every day. And we don't use spurious news sources. This is not Weekly World News. We're only quoting mainstream news sources, Reuters, UPI, Science Daily. We're only quoting those sources that have been proven to be reputable. We don't even quote blog sites and things because we want to know that the news sources that we're using are not going to come back to, bite us in the behind later on with. So we don't want to discredit ourselves, in other words.
I can understand that.
It's break time, Scott.
Tom, I'm going to have to interrupt you again. We're going to have to take our last break of the evening
already.
So if you guys want to speak with Tom Horn, please give us a call, 877-722-7382. We'll be right back.
Every Halloween at midnight, the devil simultaneously appears in two places: the high plains of India and a quiet cemetery in Kansas. It's November 2nd, the Day of the Dead. Two federal marshals report to the small town of Shinbone, Kansas, moments after a tornado warning, to transport a prisoner with no past, no identity. He is known only as Sin Jin Smith. Starring Roddy Piper, Richard Tyson, Jonathan Davis, Kevin Gage, Gary Casper, John Philbin, Billy Duffy, Charles Cyphers, and Eileen Dietz. Check out the movie that critics are calling one of 2007's most anticipated horror films by visiting www.sinjinsmith.com. That's www.sin-jinsmyth.com. St. Jin Smith is a Snapkick Productions film, written and directed by Ethan Detmeyer. Coming soon to a theater near you.
And welcome back to World of the Unexplained. Tonight we're with Thomas Horn, author of The Ahriman Gate, amongst other things. Now, Tom, we were talking on the break about what some of this is all going to boil down to. The invasion of Iraq that you mentioned earlier, that's prophesied in the Bible, things of that nature. Where do you think all this experimentation is going? Where is it taking us to, and when can we see some effects of that?
Well, obviously, and to be honest with you, I see this as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy as it was in the days of Noah. I think that there is a great deal of scripture that tell us that there would be a repeat of events that were happening during the days of Noah and during the days of Lot that would also be occurring in the end time. But the prophecies are actually even more specific than that. And here's what I would say, once again, to those people that, they may not buy the Bible side of it, but if they understand history, and maybe if they also believe in the supernatural, and if they have any concerns about, like Ian Malcolm does, about tinkering with things that we don't know anything about, if you subscribe to the chaos theory, if you're an evolutionist, if you're a Darwinist, if you're a biblical literalist, whatever you are, think about what we're doing now in the manipulation of different kinds of living organisms and the environment. We're first of all, we're manipulating ourselves now through genetic engineering and tinkering. We are also re-engineering living species, all kinds of plants. There's a new story out tonight. It'll probably be on Raiders News Update tomorrow, but scientists have now created cotton that can be eaten. It's a new kind of genetically modified cotton.
Why?
So we're doing these kinds of things.
I mean, why? Real cotton candy, Chuck says. Yeah, who wants to eat cotton? They've used cotton seed meal in animal food and stuff like that in the past, but it's got a toxin in it that'll kill humans, and so we've never been able to eat it. Well, now they're creating a genetically modified version of that product, so we'll be able to eat that and so on. But so now on the one hand, we're doing that with living organisms, and we're doing it not knowing what the long-term ramifications or impact of the environment are going to be. And so far, independent studies are showing that it not only does unpredictable things, but it impacts the environment in negative ways. Rats that were fed with soy products being created by Monsanto die at half-life. We don't even know why yet, but they only live half as long as they should when they're eating these unnatural products. Another thing that Seeds of Destruction was able to verify through some of their stuff, and they gave congressional testimony, was that these rat products, now ask yourself why this is true. When meal products, identical meal products, other than the fact that one was natural and one was genetically modified, were placed in a containment area where rats were given the opportunity to choose for themselves which product they ate. They would not touch the genetically modified product, but they ate the natural product. Now, why would that be the case? Because as far as we know, it smelled the same, it looked the same, it tastes the same. We don't know how these rats instinctively knew the difference between genetically modified products, which they would not eat, and the other products which they would. So first of all, we're doing that. Now we're also interested today, for whatever reason, in tinkering with the environment. There was a story that came out not long ago, and you probably remember this, about DARPA hiring HARP to create a radiation belt remediation system, which they were envisioning as being a way to protect low Earth orbiting satellites from being damaged by either severe solar storms or even maybe from high altitude nuclear detonations during war. Yeah.
Remember this story?
Oh, yeah.
And they thought this would work, by using high-intensity frequency radio waves to flush particles out of radiation belts and to dump them back in the upper atmosphere and so on. But there were these ham radio operators that were saying that the scientists were already warning that this was going to cause unprecedented changes to the atmosphere. So we're doing that kind of stuff. So, and I know we're going to run out of time in 20 minutes, so let me go fast. Think about the fact that through genetically changing ourselves and also the environment, in all of these ways that we've been talking about tonight, that we could actually bring ourselves, in my opinion, into contact with forces that are behind gateways that we are completely incapable of dealing with. First of all, tinkering with frequencies and atmosphere. Who is it that the Bible and other sacred ancient books describe as the god of the atmosphere? It's Beelzebub. It's the lord of those that move in the atmosphere, the prince of the powers of the atmosphere, Satan. In the case of my book, Ahriman, the god of Ahriman-Abad, the Hebrew equivalent of cosmos, the rulers of the atmosphere. And then secondly, we're tinkering with things like sound waves, and we're weaponizing acoustics. Do you remember a few years ago when Vic Tandy was doing these experiments before he died with infrasound frequency that are below the range of human hearing, and he actually caused what appeared to be greys, ghosts, to literally come out of the darkness after him, scared the bejeebers out of him. And he wrote a thesis. Now he was not a believer. I mean, he was not a religious man. He wrote this thesis called Ghosts in the Machine because he thought that he had solved the question of what ghosts are. And his thesis was actually published in a peer-reviewed journal of psychical research. Here was a guy that was a scientist, a skeptic. He believed all of this was, just in his head, a trick of frequencies and eyeball resonation. But my point was, how do we know that he didn't understand that he simply was opening a door? It's kind of like some of this sleep deprivation work and stuff that's been done. I look back over my own family's life, and I look at my sister, and I look at my niece and some of the experiences that they've gone through, and I look at these experiments that have been done on sleep, where they're talking about people having these waking dreams and waking nightmares and whatever, and they're trying to explain this as just some nightmarish incarnation of the mind. And I say, well, if that's the case, why do these creatures always look the same? Why doesn't one person with sleep deprivation wake up with a buffalo in his bedroom, and why doesn't somebody else wake up with a 10-foot tall orangutan in his bedroom, and why doesn't somebody else wake up with a 747 jet in his front yard? Yeah. All these people are seeing the same beings, and they have been seeing them since the beginning of time, and they're described almost identically the same way. Why is that the case? Difficult for me to think that with that kind of documented account of different people, different cultures, different times, with different belief systems, different gods. The Aztecs, if they had a dream like this, they didn't record Quetzalcoatl coming down, the feathered plumed serpent. People in different cultures, different times around the world have been seeing the same phenomenon, and they're describing the same beings. And so it was interesting to me that you got Vic Tandy doing these experiments with low sound resonation, and he sees grays. He sees what's equivalent to alien grays come out of the darkness and move across the room after him and scare him. So now, let me go quickly. We're doing all of this. We're tinkering with the atmosphere, the environment, electromagnetism. We're even altering now living species as well as human embryos that could give these transhumanist creations animal-like abilities to be able to see into the electromagnetic spectrum and other areas where we cannot now see. And we know that the Bible, at least in one case, provides a story where these beings can see angelic creatures. All of that's happening, and this is all happening in the public forum. Add to that what we all know by common sense, that at least to some extent, black budgets have advanced this science at least by a decade or more beyond what the rest of us are aware of right now, and that's always been the case.
Oh yeah.
And you think of that now. What we're saying is that it could lead us to. We didn't even get to this tonight. It could lead us to a kind of ultimate psychotronic warfare that could be committed by transhuman creations, beings that appear to be human but who can actually see and interact with invisible forces like the Nephilim did. They were something beyond what we understand. And the Bible and these apocryphal texts, these pseudepigrapha texts, that's the story that they tell, the case of the Nephilim, which when you understand the full extent of the story, it brings this whole new concept to why ancient men were so terrified of these beings, because they weren't just big. They were something entirely different than you and I. And we don't have time to go into it, but when we were doing our research, we found that it wasn't just gigantism. These beings, according to the ancient texts, had psychic abilities, they had telekinetic abilities, they had mind control, they could do weird things with animals, according to the Book of Enoch. So these were something entirely different. So now here we are. Scientists are blending DNA, transgenically altering crops, mice, mice with human brains. That it's going to be this year. They're going to repeat that experiment, but this time they're going to give them 100% human brains and watch to see if they develop self-awareness. We have goats with human blood, rabbit-human embryos, human clones that are being transgenically altered that raise this whole host of these prophetic possibilities for the near future. And so here we go. We got 15 minutes left. There was a question that I always had when I was doing this research that had to do with the twofold parts of the Genesis 6 story. And here's the question. When you look at Genesis 6, the beings, whoever they are, the Elohim, involve themselves with these women, but these are mature women. In other words, purely from a scientific point of view, we're not talking about germline engineering of an embryo that then becomes something different and grows up. These women were living and walking around, as far as we know. Somehow they were used. They were altered. They were changed. They became fit extensions of these watchers. Now, first of all, think about that. What does that mean for future generations? Because it's not just germline engineering, it's current existing individuals. How would you do that? How would you change these individuals? And the next time I'm on your show, we'll talk about viruses and how you might be able to affect 100 million cells in a human body at one time. But so you have these fully grown specimens, and they become extensions for these watchers. There may be evidence of what was going on in Genesis 10, because when you leap forward from Genesis 6 to Genesis 10, you start reading about Nimrod. But one of the very first things that it says about Nimrod, who builds the Tower of Babel, it says he began, and this is the Hebrew word halal, and if you do a word study there, it's enlightening. Even if you just only use, something like the Strong's Concordance or something, you'll find that the meaning to the verb there indicates that this was the beginning of profaning himself sexually. So something very strange begins happening. And he begins, and then the next phrase is, to be a mighty. And the word mighty is Gabora, of which we derive Gaborim or Nephilim. He begins to be a Gaborim. That text could literally read, Nimrod began to become a Nephilim, or he began to be a child of the Nephilim.
Wow.
Now, is Genesis 10, is this another record, following what was happening in Genesis 6 with these women? Is this another record of a mature human who, now we don't know, did he agree? Was this a virus? Was this something that, I don't know. But he begins to be genetically altered, in my opinion. And in either case, what then happens next? He sets about to build the Tower of Babel. And the offspring of this genetic alteration, the children that began then to be born of these watchers, are, according to the ancient records, the harmony of different ancient records, they are the reincarnation after the flood of dead Nephilim. Remember, he's going to build a tower. This is his, according to Josephus, this is his method to resist and survive any future floods. The reincarnation of the dead Nephilim. Now, why do I think that this is credible? First of all, note this rendering in Genesis 6:4 in the interlinear Hebrew Bible. It says, afterward, when the B'nai Elohim came in to the daughters of Adam and they bore to them, they, that is the ones that were born, they were powerful ones which existed from ancient times, the men of name. In other words, meaning the ones that were born were before. When the B'nai Elohim came to the daughters of Adam and they bore to them, they were powerful ones which existed from ancient times, the men of name. They came back again. But this is supported in a lot of places, and I'll show you why I believe this is true. And it's an interesting question that's raised about the historical relationship between the Nephilim and the Rapha, not only in the Bible, but all of the ancient records, because the spirits of the Nephilim here, Rephaim, literally carries with it the meaning to heal, or to be healed as in a resurrection, as we said earlier. Now think about what that might mean. As scientists today have announced that they have reanimated dead human cells. Did you read those stories?
I didn't catch that one, Scott.
I saw some of it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you can go and find these stories. Scientists today reanimating, bringing back to life dead human cells. Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
As you consider what is called the Rosh Hashanah text. Now, the Rosh Hashanah text, in the Rosh Hashanah text, the Rephaim are described as having been, before death, they were both human and divine beings who worshipped the Amorite god Baal. And Baal, of course, he's the ruler of the underworld. At death, these Rephaim began to serve as the assembly of lesser gods and kings and heroes and whatever and rulers. These were the beings who had the power to return from the dead through incarnation into bodily form as Nephilim, which offers support to the biblical story of how the Nephilim were on the earth both before and after the flood. But so let's look at the scripture. The book of Job offers this very intriguing bit of confirming insight on the Rephaim when it says this, Job 26:5. Dead things are formed from under the waters. Now, the dead in that text is Rapha. It's the same word that's used by the Amorite text. And the phrase are formed is hull, which means to twist or to whirl as in a double helix coil or genetic manufacturing. Job says Rapha are actually formed in the underworld. Now, when you combine that with the fact that when the Greek Septuagint was created, the Hebrew word Nephilim was translated in Greek as gegenes. That's the English word genes, genetics. It's built around the same word as gegenes or gania, which means breed or kind. It's literally the choice of the word in the Bible that suggests that there was a genetic component to the resurfacing of the giants, the resurrection of the Nephilim. But it gets better than that. The idea that in the underworld, that the underworld is actually inhabited by these spirits that can come back from the dead, is supported in numerous places through the Old Testament. Let me give you some just very quickly since I'm going to run out of time. Ezekiel 32:27. They segregated from the heroes, the old-time giants that entered into hell in full battle dress. Proverbs 9:18. He did not know that giants are there and that her guests are in the depths of hell. Proverbs 21:16. A man that shall wander out of the way of doctrine shall abide in the company of giants. And then there's Jonah 2:6. Isaiah 14:9, and then I'll go to Jonah 2:6. Isaiah 14:9, hell below was in an uproar to meet thy coming. It stirred up the giants for thee. Now here's Jonah 2:6, and this is, I love this piece of scripture because it's talking about Jonah going down into the bottom of the sea into a city of gates, the Boravak, a fortress in the earth, a prison from which God delivered Jonah. And by the way, there's no doubt about where Jonah was because he prayed to God in Jonah 2:2, quote, out of the belly of hell, end quote, and that's the word Sheol, the underworld prison of the dead, and God brings him back. But here's the important one because I want to do this quickly. Isaiah 26:14, or I'm going to give you a couple of important ones. Isaiah 26:14 in the Dewey Reams version, let not the dead live, let not the giants rise again, end quote. Now, the reason that I believe personally that Isaiah prayed this prayer to God, that the giants would not be allowed to rise again, I think Isaiah prayed that way because Isaiah knew something about the end times, and he knew something about what potentially could happen. And this is a scripture that it actually reflects a prayer from the prophet, a petition not to allow giants to rise from the dead, to incarnate again. And yet, I believe that he prayed that way because he knew something about the future. He knew something about transgenics. He knew something about animal-human blending. He knew something about the end times and when the Americas would be in Baghdad. I don't know if he knew it was the Americas. Maybe he did. But he understood what was written. Here's 2nd Ezra, by the way. Now, here's a scripture that is not one of those that I normally would quote. It's certainly an apocryphal book that some people might not accept, but I'm only going to quote it because I think it collaborates what Isaiah is saying. 2nd Ezra 5:8. This is a very ancient book. It's actually older than some of the books of the Bible. There shall be a confusion, and the Hebrew word there is the blending of species. There shall be a confusion in many places, and the fire shall be all sent out again. The wild beasts shall change their places, and minstrous women shall bring forth monsters, end quote. Now, that's an astonishing piece of scripture to prophecy students, and the reason that it's of interest to me with regard to Isaiah is because the prophet Isaiah ties the timing of the return of those same beings in Genesis 6, the Nephilim and the Gibborim. He ties all of that, this resurrected Rephaim, in the book of Isaiah 13, 1 through 3, also 9, 19 through 22 in the Septuagint version. Here's what he says, and he's talking about when Iraq is invaded and destroyed at the end times, Babylon. The vision which Isaiah, son of Amos, saw against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain. Exalt the voice to them. Beckon with the hand. Now listen to this. Open the gate, ye ruler. I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting, for behold, the day of the Lord cometh, which cannot be escaped, a day of wrath and anger, to make the world desolate. And Babylon shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, and monsters shall rest there, and devils shall dance there, and satyrs shall dwell there. End quote. That's from the Septuagint version. Anybody that wants to know where they can get a free online copy, a scholarly copy of the Septuagint version, read this for themselves, they can. And if you look at the Hebrew text here, this is a good interpretation of the book of Isaiah, because it's exactly what he says. He says that in the end times, when Babylon is invaded and destroyed in war through foreign invaders, that God will command that a ruler open gateways, just like in the book of Revelation, where he gives commands, and these mighty, powerful angels come down and they open these pits and do different things. That God will give that command, these gateways will open, and the Gibborim, the offspring of the Nephilim, the giants, are going to come through in the last days to fulfill the wrath of God.
Wow. Well, Tom, I hate to do this to you, but we've ran out of time, and I know you've got other interviews that you've got to get on to tonight.
Yeah.
But thank you once again for being on our show. We really appreciate it.
Really fascinating stuff, Tom.
Well, thank you for inviting me back on, you guys. It's a delight.
Absolutely.
Definitely. We'll have to have you on again sometime.
Come back when your wounds heal up, okay?
Take care, Tom. We appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you later.
All right. Bless you guys. Bye.
God bless you. All right. That was Thomas Horn. Wow. He is a talkative guy tonight.
It was really interesting
I don't think I said more than 5 sentences the entire
I don't
show.
think I no,
yeah, I know I did.
Just had to sit there and listen.
Wow. Yeah. I like to talk a lot, but tonight I didn't get my chance. So
I know.
It's okay, though. But interesting stuff. I wanted to mention, guys, check out the new link on the guests, our upcoming guest site. You can see who all we've got coming up. I just changed it today.
Oh, excellent. So, well, who's your favorite X-Men, Scott?
Wolverine.
Oh, really? Chuck?
Maybe Cable or Gambit?
Cable or Gambit? Magneto, all the way.
I know that. Yeah, I knew
Magneto.
that. I knew you were a big Magneto fan.
I don't know why, and there's no relevance to it. It's kind of dumb, after such heavy topics. But
we're going to talk about who your favorite X-Man is. Call now, 877.
Anyway, but man, that was really, really interesting stuff. And I mean, 2 hours just doesn't do it justice.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
So,
and we can go as long as we want. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Because we control the streaming audio right now.
We control it.
Unfortunately, Scott probably cut us off in Omaha.
Well,
but that's okay. I think
2 minutes ago.
Yeah,
so.
Probably. But that's all right. It's all good.
I mean, it's hard to step away from that. I mean, because this is. Anyway, it happens sometimes.
It does, yeah. That was the first time in a while it's happened
That's
like
true.
that.
I mean, normally
usually we
kind of kept it together.
I don't see. Wow. I just Okay. I just can't. I can't. Right. I'm so used not to talking now.
You've lost your ability to speak.
Yes.
Your silver tongue has been plucked from your lips.
It has. It has. That's definitely the case.
I don't really know what was going on there.
I just wanted to tell you who's coming on next week because I don't know. I'm going to have to look.
Horizon Project.
Brent Miller, yeah. Horizon Project. This is crazy. What's his name's Michael Zarian's in on this with him.
Yeah. We interviewed old Michael Zarian a couple of months ago.
Oh, yeah. Randy Harrigan's next from the UFO store. And the following week, Michael Horn, the Mirror Contacts, or Meyer Contacts.
Right.
Then after that, we've got Dr. Daryl Bach. And then we're celebrating a Merry Wotu Christmas.
Right. We're going to interview the word Merry and Christmas.
That's right. Merry Wotu Christmas. Now, I've got a picture of the manger scene on our website just to piss off all those people that, like to say, like, Happy Holidays and Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Christmas, Kwanzaa.
Yeah, exactly. So I put up a picture of, like, the real reason for Christmas, the real reason we celebrate it.
It's not one of those new age frou-frou ones.
That's right. It's not one of those new age frou-frou ones.
With,
it's a traditional
mystical things.
Did you guys see this a few years ago? I was in Florida at the time. I was in law school, and somebody created this manger scene, and it had, or I guess I should call it a creche scene, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, it had George Bush in the manger scene. He was one of the wise men. I'm not making this up. It's on CNN. It was hilarious, just the thought of George Bush being a wise man for one thing.
Yeah.
But they had these wax figurines that they had made, and George Bush was a wise man. I think Samuel Jackson was. There's a lot of famous people that were. I'm not kidding. You should check this out on the internet. See if you can Google it. It was some funny stuff. I was like, oh my God, what have we become? And it was really funny. But anyway,
we just find ways to entertain ourselves, Scott.
We've got a guest for New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve?
I mean, New Year's Day.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, New Year's Day.
This will be our interview on New Year's Day.
Yeah, it's Rich Anders. He's coming on talking about UFOs. Then we've got Then we got Matthew DeLuz January 8th. Chris Roller January 15th. He's the guy that sued David Copperfield,
stealing his godlike powers.
Yes, and David Blaine for using his quote godly powers. Yeah, and then we've got Jason Hawes from TAPS. Ghost Hunters coming up.
So that's confirmed.
That's confirmed. Molly Stewart's going to be back.
That's a go.
Dennis Spalding, Jerry E. Smith's coming back.
Returning.
The ex-vampire, Bill Schnepplin.
Also returning.
Then we've got Dr. Cyril Wecht.
Oh, man, that's going to be good.
Awesome. That's going to be awesome. I put, it's gonna be all the stuff up about him. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to reschedule that because I just found out that I'm taking the bar exam for the third time on that, next day. So I'll probably have to reschedule Dr. Wecht. But then Pastor Harry, followed by in April, Teresa Bain, Actual Factual Dracula. That's all we've got for now, guys. Trent, any final words? I'm going to let you have it.
Scott.
Yeah.
It's all cool in the gang, man.
All right. This is Jay Scott, your only JD DJ on the Omni. Jeez, man, I've done this the second week.
At least you stabbed yourself this time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
The only JD DJ on the Planet Paranormal Radio Network.
This is Trent Lackey. We're coming to you from Kernersville, North Carolina, a small town. We're ready to rock.
Big on God, big on guns. Chuck, tell them we're out.
We out!
So is my head.
See you guys.
Later.